is the key is that we need to start looking at downscaled climate data and the climate models.
Well, hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Eric Planey.
Hello, I'm Lucas Finko.
I'm Gavin Dillingham.
And the three of us on February 24th for episode 6 are the Pirates of Clean Tech. Yar!
Hardy
yeah, come on, Gavin, you've got the pirate beard.
I mean, I know, I should. There you go.
Yeah. Perfect. Well, first off, we want to say welcome, everybody. Thank you for listening to our podcast. As I mentioned, this is episode 6 of our 3rd season. Last week was an incredible treat as we had Dr. Andy Palmer, formerly of Nissan and Aston Martin, to talk about the state of mobility in the electric vehicle industry. We got reception from around the world and positive comments on that interview. So thank you, Andy. Thank you, Dr. Andy. Really happy to kind of continue the momentum with some great guests we've had this season. Going to take a strike of somewhat serious tone for a second. We got a lot of questions over the last week, of course, about the situation as it unfolded in Texas. And so we were supposed to have somebody talk about energy efficiency this week, and that guest will be on next week's episode. Very sad situation because of the ice storm that struck the south part of the United States. I believe the last count I saw was 58 people passed away. And there's a lot of questions, and there was a lot of politicization, excuse my French, of what happened in Texas with the energy grid. So we were very fortunate that over the weekend we were able to find Dr. Gavin Dillingham of the Houston Advanced Research Center, right in the heart of Texas, who has a great Texas history himself. And he's our guest, and we're going to talk a little bit about this. So we thought we'd go right into it. And Gavin, welcome to the Pirates of Clean Tech. Please tell us a little bit about yourself and your background, because it's quite intriguing.
Yeah, absolutely. It's great to be on the show here, Eric and Lucas. I really appreciate the opportunity to kind of talk about what happened in Texas in the last week. There's, I think, some significant lessons learned and opportunities to kind of grow from there. As you mentioned, I'm with the Houston Advanced Research Center. I direct the clean energy work at HARC, Houston Advanced Research Center, known as HARC. We are a research institute focused on a variety of sustainability issues on air, energy, and water. So folks working on air quality, water supply issues, ecosystem services, and also most recently a lot more focus on kind of stormwater management, storm risk mitigation, especially with the flooding that we've seen in the last few years, Hurricane Harvey and such. As I mentioned, I direct the clean energy side of things. Most of that's focused on a variety of issues around decarbonization of the grid, as well as resilience of the power sector there. So right now, a lot of our work is with the Department of Energy on different programs, some focusing on microgrid deployment and resilience of critical infrastructure, others focused on some solar plus storage in low-income communities. And then another one, which we do a lot of work in, is just focused on kind of tool development for decision making. And so this one's largely focused on community energy systems or district energy systems, microgrid, and the use of a non-technical tool to help people run more accurate feasibility analysis to kind of assess whether or not a microgrid or a district energy system is a good fit for them. We do a lot of work with cities and the community. We helped the city of Houston do its first climate action plan, its first, setting of its carbon neutrality for 2050. Also focused and worked with the city of Houston a bit on Resilient Houston plan. Work across a variety of other communities with both greenhouse gas mitigation as well as resilience and adaptation type efforts as well. So really, nice span of different types of work that we hope really kind of helps improve quality of life and the environment within the state.
Cool.
Yeah, Lucas, you want to take the next one?
Yeah, Gavin, I was wondering if you could give us a little background on yourself also. So I see you have a PhD from Rice, you have a BA from Texas Tech, is that right?
Right, so I've kind of had a meandering route into where I am right now. I went to Texas Tech for my undergrad, and thought about going to law school for a little bit. Actually got into law school, checked it out for a while, decided I'm not wanting to be an attorney, so that ended up down to, or I was actually in Houston at the time, so I ended up actually getting a job at Enron. And that was quite an opportunity and an experience to be able to work there. And I was there from 99 to 2000, or past 2002, after the bankruptcy happened there, and focused on, and it was great to be able to work there, focused on things from deregulation of the kind of the gas market over in South Korea, to developing one of the first greenhouse gas emissions and life cycle assessment for a corporation, environmental management system. So a lot of kind of cutting edge kind of climate and environmental stuff we were able to work on there. So it was a great experience. After that, and after the bankruptcy with Enron, I was thinking, what's kind of that next step there? And so I really did a lot of work when I was there on government and regulatory affairs, and thought that, maybe I want to go more into the government and political side of things. And so ended up going to Rice University and getting my PhD in political science there, which has been great opportunity to really kind of meet some great people, and really kind of help me kind of focus areas in where I want to work there. Once I got out of there, I kind of worked in a variety of different places in the public sector. I really see the importance of kind of being a public servant, and really kind of working within the community. So I worked with the Mayor White administration on different policy issues. Worked under the Parker administration as director of sustainability for kind of internal operations with the General Services Department there. Started a program on energy and sustainability over at Houston Independent School District, which is the largest school district in the state of Texas, and one of the largest in the country there. And based on all that work I'd been doing there on energy and sustainability, had an opportunity to meet the people over at HARC. There were some opportunities to go join them. And so wanting to move back more into kind of the research side of things, I had an opportunity to go and work at HARC there. And so doing both the research side as well as the public service side of things. So it's a really nice combination of things there.
Cool.
It's interesting, Gavin, when I saw your background on LinkedIn, I certainly thought that you personally certainly have a vested interest in the well-being of Texas and Texans, given your background. And I think 2-3 weeks ago, if people would have talked about HARC, I think they would have talked about this great organization. And now I suspect that HARC, the word essential must keep coming up, because now we need to really talk about what had happened in Texas over the last week. And of course, we need to talk about solutions. So, we're on kind of 3-4 days into this week, and there's still a lot of questions being raised. Since you're on the ground, I was wondering if you can kind of give us a little bit of a on the ground feel about what happened in terms of the cascading of events that led to, from the storm to certain types of power generation being knocked out, to its ramifications on the entire grid, if you don't mind.
Sure. So, a lot of things happened, and none of them really that great, other than maybe ERCOT making the decision on Monday morning that they needed to start the rolling blackouts, because otherwise we probably would have seen probably month-long rolling blackout as the system was going to be, as it was trying to be rebalanced and such. And so what essentially happened here is, a winter storm came in. We typically do not see these types of temperatures within the state of Texas. Even in the 2011, that gets referenced quite a bit, wasn't as cold as this. And it just wasn't really, necessarily anticipated up until about a week prior to the event happening. What typically happens this time of year, because this is largely a state that focuses more on hot summers and peak loads in hot summer, is that a lot of the power plants are offline at this point, to where they're receiving maintenance to be ready, ready for those summer months and such. And so there was about 14 or so, maybe a little bit more than that, gigawatts of gas-fired generation and other systems offline for maintenance at that point. And ERCOT tried to get a bunch of those back online, but you can only rebuild a turbine so quickly, and you can only get systems back online so quickly. Plus, there was just access to gas issues as far as ability to kind of get gas at such a quick period of time and get that supply offered. So we ended up essentially entering into this space with already a good chunk of some of our generation down, and I think it was somewhere around 14 gigawatts. It was down when around Monday or so. So ERCOT tried to get as much of that back online, but once again, difficult to rebuild all that stuff so quickly and get it out of maintenance so quickly. And then as kind of Monday happened, we ended up with about 13 gigawatts of the total amount of thermoelectric systems being offline of that. So, typically, there's about 70 gigawatts of thermal generation capacity in ERCOT, and we were down to about 45 or so fairly quickly. And, some of that had to do with, of course, the 14 gigawatts I mentioned, but then also, some of those systems just were down because they weren't winterized appropriately. And so the natural gas systems just didn't have the appropriate winterization on it. Some of the sensors froze. There was the nuclear plant that tripped off due to issues due to a sensor issue and an actuator issue over there, due to freezing temperatures. And then just the overall supply of natural gas to the thermoelectric power, to the natural gas plants was compromised just due to lack of winterization of the natural gas system there. And so you had pipelines that were freezing up and essentially not able to deliver the gas. And in some cases, those that were able to deliver the gas was diverted over to residential for heating purposes rather than go into the power plants and such. And so you ended up with a significant amount of thermoelectric power generation offline. So from what I've heard, a couple of the coal plants kind of came offline, not only because of freezing up, but also because the coal piles were too wet and frozen in order to provide the needed material there. On the wind side of things, which that's where it was initially where the scapegoating started in some areas, was that, oh, look at all this horrible issues with renewable energy and the icing of the blades, and solar just didn't perform, and et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
And to some degree, yeah, there was icing. The wind generation did go down. There was a good chunk of that was out of capacity. Once again, it was not winterized appropriately. We all know that any of these systems can operate in very cold climates if appropriate winterized and such.
Right.
And so anyway, the wind went down. The solar was down a bit. And when we were looking at the numbers here and trying to figure out what all happened, you see all these systems, as far as the gigawatt capacity going down. I think 11 gigawatts of coal was where we started. We went down to 6. Nuclear went down by about 1.2 gigawatts. Gas went down eventually from 44 gigawatts down to 26. Wind went down from around 5 to 7 is what they were anticipating, went down to between 1 and 5 and kind of varied around that. But solar actually went up. Solar was expected to be about 1 gigawatt and went up to about 2 to 3 gigawatts over this time period. And so you ended up with, one thing at least overperforming or outperforming is renewable. And also the wind kind of outperformed for the systems that were able to stay online. And I think a lot of that was the coastal wind, or once it got de-iced and warmed up a bit, was able to actually outperform what they expected that to do. Within the state of Texas, it's still very much a thermoelectric based, portfolio of natural gas, coal, and nuclear here. And so whenever they were doing their winter planning, there wasn't a huge expectation that wind capacity was going to play a huge role. Usually this time of year, wind capacity goes down. It's just kind of how it's just seasonal in that regard. And usually wind plays a much larger role in the summer months or so. And so they really only forecasted to provide kind of a much smaller percentage of what it usually provides there. And so when we started talking about, renewables that kind of came down and were an issue, it really was not the case, because it's still predominantly a thermoelectric, natural gas, coal, nuclear type of grid portfolio that we have here. So those are kind of a lot of things that kind of happened during that time period, and we can kind of go into what could have been prevented it and what could have led to maybe less issues, if you like. But that's just kind of the general state of what happened there.
It's just interesting because we talk about diversification is always a good thing. Yet when you talk about multiple sources of power and all of them went down, there is a common thread, and that is being prepared in terms of winterization. You're talking to two hosts who grew up in the snow belt of the Midwest. So we certainly know about winterization, and it does seem that climate change dictates that, more southern states have to be ready for these events because they seem to be more prevalent. So,
right, and that's one of the key discussions that we're having here is, to what degree do these systems need to be winterized and weatherized and prepared for whatever those extreme weather events look like. And when you talk to the utilities, and this is on a national basis, you talk to the ISOs, you talk to the ISOs, the independent system operators like ERCOT, PJM, et cetera, or the utilities, in most cases, they're still using historical weather data. They look back essentially 20 years of data and they forecast that 20 years, that data 20 years ahead.
Right.
And when you do that, you're essentially assuming that the weather patterns are going to continue as they have in the past. What we've been trying to educate and what we've been talking to utilities, and we actually about a month ago talked with ERCOT again about the importance of not just using weather data. And where we finally are starting to get some traction with them on that is the key is that we need to start looking at downscaled climate data and the climate models. And are they perfect by any means? No, they're not. I mean, they're models, so they're going to have some level of error and ambiguity in them. But they do allow you to start running some scenarios and allow you to start putting some probability distributions about the likelihood of some of them. And so if we start this downscaled climate data, it's global climate models that have been developed or statistically downscaled climate models using weather station data, whatever that combination looks like there, you end up at least getting a better picture of what you may need to, what you need to anticipate and you need to be thinking about there. And so that's really what we're trying to educate the energy sector on to some degree is, the likelihood of droughts, of extreme heat, of flooding, of hurricanes, those types of events, we're starting to get a pretty decent feel of what to anticipate in the future and kind of get an idea of that, over the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years, this is the likelihood of these is going to be X, and we're going to probably need to start taking some action in order to mitigate that risk. And so we hope that through this kind of event, at least we'll start having some discussions and integration of this kind of data to kind of change the business as usual way in which we do energy planning. When we kind of look at what, why is ERCOT the way it is now, and why are we where we are now? I had developed a post on Medium about, how do we keep this from happening again? And the discussions that we're in there is largely about, this is a market that's focused on the lowest price resource. ERCOT takes the lowest price cost of energy and sells that to, or has that come into the market. When you start talking about adding these winterization packages, these weatherization packages and such, you end up, putting a competitive disadvantage at any of these types of resources here. And so if say you have wind turbines that decide, okay, we're going to put de-icing equipment and we're going to weatherize these systems, that puts them at a disadvantage from the natural gas plants or the coal plants. The natural gas plants start doing that, they're a disadvantage to the renewables. And so there's no incentive or kind of push or requirements or standards that require these systems to winterize or weatherize in any way that would make them more resilient. It's all very much focused on, can you get the lowest cost of power to the grid in a reliable manner? And that's reliability is different from resilience. And that's one of the key areas that we need to start really, really focusing on is how do we improve the incentives or, put the standards in place, especially resilience standards in place that allows for these systems to be a bit more resilient.
Yeah, I know I was involved in some utility planning discussions after Sandy here in the Northeast, and it was viewed as a 1 in 100-year storm. And shockingly enough, I don't know if this ever hit the public, the decision to, say upgrade capital, upgrade assets that had a 40-year life to prepare for a 1 in 100-year storm didn't make any sense. They were going to spend billions of dollars on assets that, would be worthless in 40 years to prepare for a storm that comes around once in 100 years. And so shockingly enough, the decision was to do nothing to prepare.
Right. So
they just saw it as too rare of an event. We could spend tons of money and they would never be used. So this decision isn't, simple. And understanding if things are going to be different in the future is really critical. And actually, when I was at that utility, they did decide to incorporate a 1 foot increase in sea level. So that was very interesting also. So yeah, these are tough.
Yeah,
tough
you're
decisions.
absolutely right. It's because you're dealing with future events and what's the likelihood, and that's where you have a lot of what's been termed the adaptation gap in infrastructure planning is, do I plan for extreme heat? Do I plan for flooding? Do I plan for extreme cold? And some of them have complementary natures to them as far as if you do weatherization of homes, you can deal with heat and cool, but some of them don't, and you have a trade-off there. So what's that trade-off look like?
Yeah. And we wanted to point out too that a lot of people didn't know before this that Texas has a pretty independent grid. Most of the U.S. is connected. There's two large interconnections that are the two halves of the U.S. And so there's a lot of power that can flow, all up and down the eastern seaboard. Texas doesn't have that. So can you talk about maybe why that is and what impact did that have? Like, if we get rid of that, can it fix the problem that we had last week?
There's a significant debate around that right now, and a lot of discussion happening there. And you're right, a lot of people were very surprised as far as, why are we an island out here in the middle of the country, not connected to essentially the national grid to some degree. And we have the Western interconnect and the Eastern interconnect. There is one tiny little, or not tiny, but there's one transmission interconnect into MISO, and there's actually one into Mexico. And we were getting a bit of power from MISO whenever they had enough capacity and before they really started feeling the effects of the winter storm hitting them. But if we had an actual full interconnection to where this was actually part of a much larger grid where everything was kind of feeding back and forth, and there were multiple places in which it was interconnected both on the Western and the Eastern side. My take on that is you end up with a lot more flexibility and ability to kind of reroute power and move power around to where in times where, maybe MISO was needing this power, and our power was coming back up, we could, export power there. Vice versa, when we were needing the power, especially coming out of the Western interconnect, where you saw El Paso Electric had absolutely no problem keeping the power on because they're connected to the Western interconnect.
Right.
To be able to bring that power into the state there, because those, you're talking about New Mexico, Colorado, those areas, they're dealing with very cold temperatures and kind of real extreme events like we were experiencing here, and so their systems are kind of built for that type of stuff, or at least can better handle that.
Right.
So I think I think there's going to be a lot of discussion on that. The reason that we're not interconnected at this point is largely because by not being interconnected, we do not have to follow much of the FERC regulations and requirements. Although the ERCOT does follow a lot of the ERC decisions, or kind of follows what's going on there and maybe adopts similar kind of rules within the market that have been kind of developed specifically for Texas based on kind of what FERC has been doing. But there's no requirement that we have to follow any of the FERC regulations or standards or recommendations there. And so independence is one of the things that Texas has prided itself on. And it kind of bit us in the ass this last time. So.
Yeah, it's a double-edged sword. Yeah.
No doubt about that. We wanted to have you on because the political noise was so apparent so quickly. People blaming frozen wind turbines because they don't like wind, but those people have vested interests in the oil and gas industry, et cetera. A lot of that noise was coming out. And so we're really appreciative of you being here. But now the hard work starts from the political process, which is, truly investigating what happened and how to solve it. I think it was announced over the last day or so that several board members of ERCOT have resigned. So it's already beginning to happen. But from a practical standpoint, what would you recommend from a policy standpoint? Like, what would you like to see done in terms of prioritization, in terms of ease of execution to get done? What types of policies and regulations would you like to see implemented over the next year or so to start the process of addressing these issues, like winterization, for example?
Right. The scapegoating has begun with ERCOT, which is unfortunate, but I guess someone had to fall on the sword there, and ERCOT was the one that got it there. I mean, we actually put out this little schematic that showed, who was responsible for what within the state of Texas. And at the top is the governor and the state legislature, and then they feed into the Public Utility Commission, and the Public Utility Commission then feeds into ERCOT. ERCOT's largely a scheduler, is what they do. They're an ISO, and they have some responsibilities for kind of, they go out and do inspections to see, how plants are operating and what are going on. But who sets the standards is the Public Utility Commission. The Public Utility Commission is the board members there, commissioners are chosen by the governor. So essentially, it's kind of starts at the top here, and there needs to be better accountability and responsibility up there for the kind of system that's been developed that ERCOT now has to manage and such. And so ERCOT's largely managing what they've been given. It's not them making the rules necessarily and driving the ship. It's folks above them. And so, what needs to happen in many regards. I think one of the key things that we would like to see happen, and I kind of talked about this earlier, is that there just needs to be a different way in which we approach our long-term system assessment and how we approach our energy planning. There isn't like an integrated resource plan in Texas or anything like that, but there is, they do the long-term systems assessment that ERCOT does. Once again, they use historical weather data. And as I said, we've talked with them about potentially starting to integrate climate data in this, and this is about a month ago. And so having that type of change or policy recommendation or requirement that they start looking at a variety of different climate scenarios and the impact on the grid, I think is going to be a key piece. And once people start getting better understanding as far as what that potential risk starts to look like, you end up potentially with greater policy action, greater desire for the regulations and whatever that, or maybe you've seen market mechanisms or incentives to get people to really start working towards that winterization or weatherization of those assets. And so I think a lot of it is just making sure there's greater transparency and clarity, and requiring that any of our planning efforts take into account downscaled climate data and make sure that this information can be used or is being used in any of the planning efforts, whether it's generation planning or transmission distribution planning, and to see how that, how that can really kind of drive the market. It's going to be very difficult within the state to push any major regulations. The state is just not a big regulatory state. And that's what attracts a lot of businesses to the state of Texas, is it's the lack of regulations and its low energy costs. Well, the low energy costs may soon be going away if we, as we look to see what these retail electricity providers are going to end up having to charge, and some of these other energy companies are going to have to charge, at least in the near term, to become solvent here. But you kind of start wondering, how do we start, making this changes happen? And I think a lot of it is just bringing the transparency and a better understanding of what this future risk looks like. And it needs to be, it can't be done by industry. It needs to be done by, by the research community, by the academic or research institutes, just kind of going in and saying, okay, we don't have a dog in the hunt, but this is what we see happening in the market, and this is why we think that something needs to happen. And the expectation is, once that transparency and clarity gets in there, potentially moving towards greater action to make the system more resilient. Some of the other ones would just be better education and engagement on winterization and setting standards. We need to at least bring in and start setting some standards. How to what degree are they mandated or enforced? That's going to be very much a political question, a political football, because once again, we don't do a lot of regulatory stuff here in the state of Texas. But we do, if we can find a way in which to incentivize it, in which to, kind of have it become part of the market there, that may drive things. But I don't. It's that difficulty at this point to see what's the political will and political desire to really enforce some of these mechanisms, especially resilient standards, or enforce that if you come and build a power plant within the state of Texas, you're going to have to meet XYZ resilience requirement. Or if you build new transmission infrastructure, you have to meet ABC resilience requirement. Right. And one of the key issues around that is, what exactly does that resilience requirement going to look like? If you start building enclosures around all our natural gas plants, that's great for wintertime, but most of the time we're pretty hot, and those enclosures can decrease the efficiency of the natural gas power plants. Yeah. And so how do you balance that piece as well? So there's going to have to be a lot of kind of discussion around that as well, as far as what's that balance of winterizing, weatherizing, et cetera. And a lot of that's going to have to be done by looking at kind of that climate data, and looking at what are these models telling us, and what are the scenarios that we see out there. And so how do we start quantifying the benefits of these different actions based on those scenarios?
It's funny, on Sunday, I was watching some of the Sunday morning talk shows, and on one they had both the mayor of Houston, who's a Democrat, and the mayor of Fort Worth, who I believe is a Republican. And they were both lamenting the fact that after the 2011 weather event, there was a series of recommendations about winterization, but they emphasized the fact they were recommendations. They were never regulatory requirements. And so really only a small modicum actually got implemented. And so, they felt that there's going to be a lot of a postmortem now on the 2021 scenario, looking exactly like, are we going to make that same mistake twice? So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
You're absolutely right. I'm very curious to see what plays out. There's been, some legislative action starting to take place, more focused on creating a climate change mitigation commission that Representative Enchi has been proposed. There's another one that another kind of freshman representative is looking at proposing around climate risk within the state of Texas. But we were actually talking about this yesterday on a separate podcast, and one of the key discussions was, if you want to really see some major change, happening in here, a lot of it's about mobilization and voting and getting the people in office that kind of see the benefit of government, providing those necessary services of, electricity and water, and just kind of providing those basic public goods, which we seem to some degree have gotten away from in Texas. And we kind of ended up in the current shape we are now, where, basic infrastructure largely failed and ended up with, people dying and a lot of misery and a significant amount of cost, especially to homeowners and commercial business owners that see these huge plumbing bills that they see now. I mean, that's one of the things that, there's a lot of discussions on the electricity side of thing, and even some discussions on the water quality issue, the boil water notice is that we had, but there's still thousands of households and residents and commercial properties that don't have water. We have two people we have a small, we're 30 people at HARC. There's still two people without water, or two households, because there's not enough plumbers, and so you ended up with a lot of people still kind of suffering through this thing.
Right,
so
right.
It's so are we going to get people to kind of, get mobilized, get active, start voting their interests there? Our business is going to start voting with their feet and saying, we're not going to put up with this anymore.
Right.
Who knows? So we'll see.
Yeah, I heard my aunt lives in Houston, so one of her neighbors had their pipes burst and it flooded their whole house. They lost their whole house. So
Yeah.
just crazy. They're not ready for this. Well, one last question. Since you have the Enron in your background, I have to ask this question. I've been fielding questions about these power bills, right? And these power bills are crazy. And you look at the ERCOT prices, and they were pegged at the limit. They were pegged at $9,000 a megawatt hour. That's $9 a kilowatt hour. That's roughly 100 times higher than normal for days.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's an exceedingly high number. I think NISO's kept it to 2,000, but before, years ago it was kept at 1,000 or 900, even less.
Right.
So is that number crazy high? Do you think there's some Enron-like nefarious activity here, and why isn't $9,000 enough for a generator to go out and send a guy with a torch or something? It's $9,000. Like, get your generator on. So why didn't $9,000 work? I mean,
Right.
Lots of questions here, right?
Well, yeah, just for this particular time period, there just wasn't any generation to come on, or if they could come on, natural gas couldn't get to them, or the fuel.
Well, right.
Coal piles just weren't there to provide.
Right.
And so, yeah, they could push as hard as they want to get these systems on. They just didn't have any fuel to do anything with them. So, if the $9,000 piece there, that whole thing was to provide an incentive to build more natural gas, or just more generation across the state. And so the whole expectation was that these $9,000 points could be hit, or not always 9,000, but much higher energy prices could be hit, especially during summer peak periods. As generators saw these summer peak dollars, coming in, they're like, oh no, we need to go build more stuff because this pricing is so high. The fact is these generators bank a significant amount of money, those that can remain online, when the prices get to this point. I mean, there was a huge amount of money made by generators that stayed online during this last period.
Right.
Huge windfalls. And so it's not, this mechanism is not working. It has not motivated any additional generation coming online. The generation that we see coming online is none of it's merchant power. It's all power purchase agreements driven by corporates, or driven by institutional investors, or driven by cities, people that want to have greener portfolios and want to say, hey, look, I have 100% renewable. I'm Amazon, or I'm Walmart.
Right.
So that's kind of where the market is and what's driving in the market right now. And when you look at this $9,000 over the last, it was over 4-day period, there's plenty of capacity on the system. It's not like we needed more capacity on the system. We needed more generation. We needed a fuel supply that actually worked, and we needed the existing system to actually work. So I'm going to be curious to see how this gets discussed, but because it hasn't done what it's supposed to do yet. It hasn't worked how it's supposed to work yet. It hasn't motivated any additional generation. So,
and it's an old problem. I mean, we've known about the missing money problem for decades. I mean, right? And capacity markets are the answer. So you think they'll call for capacity markets in Texas?
there's always been a kind of an underlying ongoing discussion about capacity markets, and it always gets shot down by a report, and someone else's new report, or a discussion about how these, how energy markets work so great and capacity markets don't work. And it's just, you're going to pay a lot more cost on capacity markets versus energy markets. And so, I mean, it's an ongoing debate within the state there. You have some very much, but the strong usually on the energy side.
I was talking to a private equity firm a few months back who owns a distributed energy rooftop solar company in California. And after the California wildfires, people were going crazy to get rooftop solar. And it wasn't necessarily because of the green aspect, it was from the resiliency aspect. They wanted to have power generation, backup power at their house. Do you think a potential discussion point for Texas in terms of solution would be really incentivizing more distributed from a resiliency standpoint at the home front? And that can solve a lot of the problems that were, when the down capacity from all the different utility grid power sources.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the things we've talked about in a lot of the resilience we do is on the distributed energy generation, distributed energy resources. How, one of our key energy engineers at HARC focuses on microgrid optimization and modeling those to kind of optimize the combination of different generation resources based on market prices and technology costs and such. And so when you start throwing in the microgrids and distributed energy resources, you take out some of that risk. You take out the risk, especially from transmission lines, which are highly susceptible to extreme weather events. You allow for one of the other things you take away is potentially the water risk. The state of Texas has significant drought risk and water risk. And when you start looking at microgrids that are not reliant on water for cooling, you end up having a greater resilience benefit there as well. The generators really dislike the idea because they're not in that market. They produce large power plants and they want you to buy from that. So that's been kind of a big push against greater deployment of microgrids and distributed energy. And but you're seeing a growing number of solar and storage companies coming in. Sunrun's making a big move. Sonova. A lot of these folks that have typically been outside of Texas are now coming in. A lot of people are very much looking into it. I was talking to Tesla earlier this week. They're saying the number of people reaching out and setting reservations on Powerwalls is just going off the charts in Texas. And so you're seeing a lot of people trying to figure out, all right, so how do I be more resilient within my household, and how do I sustain power within my household? And so maybe I think we're seeing that trend starting to happen. And I think as solar and storage costs continue to go down, you're going to see an acceleration of that. I've just anecdotally, I kind of just follow what the cost of solar plus storage would look like at my house over the last few years, and just kind of watching where the prices are. So I'll reach out to one of these vendors and say, all right, so this is what I'm looking to do at my house. What would that cost? And it's gone down by about half in the last 2 years for what I would need for a solar plus storage. And so it's becoming to a point now where, a lot of, at least middle income and higher folks can really, maybe start investing and looking into this a bit more. But then you start getting into low moderate income type populations. And that's another key area that needs to be focused on, is that, a lot of us can maybe buy solar plus storage systems or do some sort of microgridded commercial property or a campus. But what about these lower income populations that can't, dish out 20 grand or 30 grand or whatever that number looks like? And so actually one of the projects we're doing with the Department of Energy now is solar plus storage in low income communities, and looking at resilient community centers, looking at what does storage for solar look like at residential households, what are different types of funding models. We're looking at opportunity zones potentially as a way in order to provide low cost of capital for these types of assets. So just kind of looking at different business models and funding ways in which to bring this resilience and kind of the green benefit to the low income communities as well. So I think we're getting to a point where there's plenty of interest, plenty of desire to start doing this, not only for the green side, but also for the resilient side. And I think across the population, there's opportunities that are becoming available there. So I'm excited to see how this continues to
Well, I'm smiling ear to ear right now, and as is Lucas, because part of the reason we do this podcast is we're trying to figure out ways and help people of more moderate means, how they can be part of the clean tech revolution. So we certainly applaud the fact that you guys are looking at lower income families and giving them the same opportunities to participate in clean energy and resiliency like others who have more means with them. So I know we're running a little bit short on time. You answered all our questions, and this has been such a great deep dive. I know our listeners will be very happy. Just tell us a little bit more about where they can get information about HARC. I really recommend people to go on LinkedIn with you, because you've been publishing some great stuff over the last couple of days that kind of give updates on what's happened in Texas. So talk a little bit more about people who want to have follow-up, where they can go for information.
Yeah, absolutely. We actually just put out a new website. I think it was about 3 or 4 months ago. And that just provides a great set of resources of all the tools that we have. There it is right there, harcresearch.org. We've also put together the Clean Energy Texas Hub, which essentially brings together all these decision tools we've developed. If you're looking at solar plus storage, you're looking at energy financing, you're looking at just what are different case studies and best practices, both on the commercial residential side, that we've started to put together. And that's with the State Energy Conservation Office. But a lot of the stuff we try to do and what we put on our website is really focused on kind of tool development, decision making that people can use here. That's a great picture there on the left, and people in the masks. That was the largest citizen science project related to heat islands in the country. Cool. Yeah, it's a very cool project. One of our postdocs did that at the time. Very cool project called Heat. But anyway, so we work in the heat island space as well.
Awesome.
But in any case, and also, we're on Twitter, we're on LinkedIn. I think some of the articles you've seen, I've been posting on Medium under, we have a platform called Pythias Analytics that we've been rolling out that's focused on climate risk analytics. And so this Pythias Analytics is the name of the group there. And the focus pretty much on downscaled climate data, downscaled climate modeling and such. And that's on Medium. And then we also just have a website, pythiasanalytics.com. Pythias is named after one of the, I'm going blank on the name. One of the oracles, there's I think 6 or 7 different kind of oracles, and Pythias is the one that was kind of one of the first political consultants. So anyway, Pythias is focused on
fantastic
climate risk. Anyway.
Well, look, Gavin, I want to say thank you very much for being a guest today. You have just been fantastic. I know you have a hard stop in 10 minutes, so we'll probably just go ahead and Lucas and I will do our articles, and we'll invite you back sometime in the future when maybe things calm down a little bit. We'd love to have a little bit more of kind of a follow-up with you to hear how things have migrated in terms of the postmortem on the Texas crisis from last week. And love to stay in touch with you.
Absolutely. It was wonderful talking with you guys. Thanks for reaching out. We very much appreciate it.
Yeah, and we have to say, Gavin was going to fake it and say that he didn't, the beer supply chain in Houston is running low. So we were going to give him a hall pass for having a sparkling water in his cup. So next time you're on, then we're going to talk about microbrews a little bit more.
Yeah, that's great. We have some great ones in Houston, and so yeah, I'd love to promote some of those here. So
yeah, big time.
Great. Thank you very much, Dr. Gavin Dillingham.
All right. Well, thank you guys. Take care.
Take care. And we're back, ladies and gentlemen. Lucas, I don't know about you, but I'm so happy we were able to find Gavin to come on at such short notice and really give us, I think, a walkthrough, a Texas Ranger walkthrough, Walker Texas Ranger, but to give us a walkthrough that was so involved as to what exactly happened that we're eliminating a lot of the misinformation out there. So I thought he was great.
Yeah, he was great, and he answered all of our questions. Some of our questions were really tough, and he obviously knows his stuff. He knows Texas. He knows all the issues. So he was perfect. He was just a great guest to have on. Yeah.
Yeah, I have to say, I thought about last week where Texas, or Houston specifically, likes to say they're no longer oil and gas capital of the world or energy capital of the world. And part of me thought after what happened last week, I don't know if they deserve that title, but Gavin kind of like how do you say, his knowledge base and his on the ground understanding of the energy industry, particularly in Texas, kind of brought that back up for me, that Houston really has such incredible talent in the energy business. And
Yeah.
the work that HARC is doing is fantastic, especially in lower income communities. So hats
Yeah.
off to Gavin and HARC.
Well, if you want to be on the bleeding edge of energy, you're the first one that's going to find, how things fail. So, you might get a black eye and you might look bad, but you're on the cutting edge. You're the first to know, right?
Fair enough.
You're
And
the
you know
first
what?
to fix it.
To quote Rocky Balboa, it's not how hard you hit, it's how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward.
Right.
So how Texas responds, I love that line. How Texas responds to what happened last week is really going to determine their reputation, their credibility going forward.
Well, right. That's why that 2011 event is so relevant. That I heard there was a 357-page report that was issued detailing all the changes they need to make, and they didn't make them. And he makes a good point that Texans want to be Texans and they don't want to have regulation. So,
yep, and totally understand that. But
right.
By the way, ironic, 357 pages only in Texas. Would it be the same number of pages as the same caliber of a Magnum?
Only in Texas.
All right. Well, before we get to articles, we're definitely ripping on Gavin a little bit for not having a microbrew, but he gets a whole pass, given that supply chain and the grocery stores are still constrained this week in Texas. I'm drinking, and I'm going back to Hudson Valley Brewery. I am drinking their Valley Beer Vintage 2019, and this is 4 of their seasonal beers that were combined, rebottled, and then aged for a year.
Ooh.
Incredible. Has a little bit of a citrusy cider feel. It is so good. They need to put, they have a wax top, so they need to put that little thing where you can open the wax. It took me 10 minutes to open the thing, but it was so worth it.
Yeah, and I'm back at Fort Nonsense Brewing here in just outside of Morristown, New Jersey, where Fort Nonsense is. Drinking the Benedict Amber Trader Ale. Look at that. It's even handwritten. It's quite delicious.
That sounds so good.
I recommend it.
All right. Well, listen, we're going to just do lightning round on our articles. Many of our articles actually cover Texas and what happened, so it would be somewhat repetitive. So we're going to go lightning round. So, Lucas, why don't you go first today?
You want me to go first?
Yeah.
Yeah. So most of these just covered what we just talked about. So I'm going to go through them real quick. This is from Utility Dive. This is published on February 18th by Catherine Morehouse. Power experts cite gas constraints as main cause of ERCOT outages, but system planning questions remain. The fact that this was not wind's fault is not an argument that the wind system as we currently have it would have done better if it were part of the grid. So again, we talked about all these issues, right? Wind power not being the problem, gas being constrained, and their grid being constrained also by not having a large interconnect. So if you want more details on that, everything's in here. We just talked about it in full detail. So there's a lot of detail here. I'm just going to keep going because this article from Texas Tribune is very similar. This actually was shared by Lori on LinkedIn. I think this is the article. A lot of discussion there. So come find us on LinkedIn. There's a discussion going on. Put your opinion in there and keep that conversation going because there's a lot of comments on there. This one is February 16th by Aaron Douglas and Ross Ramsey. No, frozen wind turbines aren't the main culprit for Texas power outages. Lost wind power wasn't really expected to be a large part of wind generation, so they weren't really relying on it. But the sources from natural gas, nuclear, coal have struggled to generate power, and that was the real big issue. Those were the ones they were relying on. So you can read this article to get a lot of details here. But again, it's a lot about the numbers that we just quoted in the interview. And so myself, let me see, this one has a good graph here. You can see kind of where energy capacity was, and then you see this energy use, it's a yellow line, drops off, not because demand went down, it's because they cut people off, they had blackouts. And so you see the energy capacity just come down dramatically here, February 15th. Yeah. And so if you want more data, if you want to see it, I checked ERCOT's website. They share all their data publicly on their website. So I typically go to the source. They don't have their fuel mix spreadsheet posted yet. They post it monthly. So maybe we'll come back in 2 weeks and we'll take a look in Excel or something. So you can go to the EIA. The EIA has their Today in Energy website, which I love, and they do provide the breakdown in here so you can see it yourself. Here it is. This one is from February 19th. So if you go to EIA Today in Energy, you can see dramatically here, wind dropped, natural gas dropped huge from 45 gigawatts down to 30 gigawatts. It looks like in half a day. Nuclear also dropped, which we talked about. Coal also dropped. You know, nuclear, I found the nuclear outage really weird because their reliability is stellar. They're up 95% of the time. They only shut down typically to refuel. So it's very weird that a nuclear plant comes offline. And so what I'd found is that the water pipes had frozen and they couldn't get water from the nuclear reactor to the generator.
Right.
And so they came offline. So there was no issue with the reactor itself. The water in the reactor was fine. It's just that secondary water that goes in the heat exchanger that drives the generator. They couldn't get water into there. So very, very weird. I mean, frozen pipes. That's why I'm saying, like, for $9,000, you should be able to get a guy with a torch and go out there and unfreeze that pipe or something. But yeah, this is just crazy. This is crazy, Van.
Yep. Totally. I'm totally with you on that one. Well, mine a little bit of a different tack because I knew Lucas was going to cover a lot of the data. This is out of Motor Trend. Ton of other stories about this. Texans are using the Ford F-150 hybrid to power the frigid homes during the winter storm. About a month ago, I was reading Competitor Car and Driver, a review where one of the editors had the Ford F-150 hybrid with a 7.2 kilowatt onboard generator, and he used it to power half his home for like almost a week. So to Ford's credit, Ford had 450 of these sitting in dealer lots in Texas, and they ordered dealers to disperse them into neighborhoods and homes to help get people temporary power. And there's two things I want to talk about this. One is for owners of both battery electric vehicles and hybrids, if you want a very, not say low cost, but if you want some resiliency very quickly and you're shopping for a car, this justifies a hybrid and battery electric vehicle. There's a ton of YouTube videos out there that show how a simple inverter you can buy, I think for $100 at most hardware stores or electronic stores, can be plugged into a Chevy Volt, a Chevy Bolt, a Nissan Leaf, and you can actually use the energy from your battery to give you essential heat while your power is out. So if you don't want to spend money on a whole Generac system, you can do something like a Ford F-150. And I believe Ford actually has a system in place where you can even put a wall mount fuse box that would plug into your generator, much like a Generac system. So these are expensive vehicles. I think they're $60,000, so they're not for everybody. But for people who are living in apartments and want an electric vehicle, there's another reason to do it. And that's actually simplistic ways to have some resiliency and backup. So I love this story. So that's my main one regarding Texas. Real quick, this is the Mashable story where I actually found Gavin Dillingham. And this was the story for me that really started saying you could use wind turbines in cold climates. 40% of Iowa's power is coming from wind turbines, and Iowa's a cold weather climate. Antarctica. This is amazing. In Antarctica, they decided years ago to switch to wind turbines instead of diesel generators because from a supply chain logistics standpoint, you got wind turbines running all the time. And they're operating in Antarctica. And even though Antarctica is warming up, it's still damn cold there. So I really recommend good story here in Mashable by Mark Kaufman from, I think, middle or late last week.
Yeah, look at this. They're saving 120,000 gallons of diesel fuel every year, and their average annual temperature is 0.
And don't forget the diesel fuel or the fuel costs to ship the 120,000 gallons to Antarctica from wherever it's probably sourcing in Latin America, right?
Yeah.
Just, I mean, come on, folks. So anyone who decides to dispute wind turbines don't work in frozen weather, feel free to take a trip to Antarctica and look at them spin.
Yeah, agreed.
All right, my last story, this just kind of actually does dovetail a little bit what we were talking about follow-up and regulatory. In Texas, you had all these recommendations made in 2011, and none of them were actually enacted. Well, this one, we need to call stuff like this out. Last week was a big deal because the U.S. re-entered the Paris Climate Accords, which we celebrated. While that was happening, in France itself, Paris court finds France guilty of failing to meet its own Paris Climate Accord commitments. 4 environmental groups in France sued the French government, and Mr. Macron, who's prime minister there, who sells him, or president, I believe, sells himself as a green president, as someone that's going to move France forward. But they've already been reneging on some of their targets they need to get to by 2030 and are asking for extensions. So 4 environmental groups sued. They won. Now, the judge actually said we're not going to give monetary damages. I think they gave something symbolic like $1 or €1 to each organization.
Yeah.
But they're supposed to be cutting gas emissions right now. They're supposed to be using 2030 as target dates to get to 1990 levels for emissions.
Right.
And it's not happening. So really, I'm so happy the French court system and these 4 organizations called the French government, because you know what? A Paris Climate Accord means nothing if nobody's actually acting upon it.
Well,
and
right.
I know President Biden is going to act upon it. And I know other countries are as well. And I know markets are getting that way. You know, the cost of building wind is a lot cheaper than the cost of building natural gas these days. So we need to get to where we need to go, and nobody could be delaying and deferring. Everybody needs to be all hands on.
This is interesting. I think one of the criticisms too of the Paris Climate Agreement was that it didn't really have any teeth. It wasn't legally binding. So I think this court case is largely symbolic. I don't know, like, what are they gonna order them to do something? I don't know what the, I don't know what the remedy is, right?
Well, the remedy, I think, first off, there's the court of public pressure, and having a court case like this actually helps fuel that. So I don't know what the specific remedy is, but I think that it's calling politicians to actually create the policy and to execute on the policy to meet original targets and not to defer them by 2 years, 3 years, 5 years.
Yeah.
So that's all. I think that's all I have. So I'm happy with that. Okay,
cool. I just wanted to share again the Houston Research Center's website, which was harcresearch.org. I don't know if he gave the website actually. And then here's Pythos Analytics. Also, this is their website if you want to go check them out. Really interesting. He brought up the point of our climate modeling has to give answers to decision makers, right? It can't just be, 2 degrees, it has to say, look, we're going to have real weather variability in Texas, and we need to plan for that. So they have to get more specific with these climate models. So it's really interesting to see this.
Yeah, I thought this was great. He even pulled me back in a little bit because I'm like, we need to weatherize Texas. We need to weatherize those pipelines and those turbines. Mm-hmm. But you need to do it based upon data, because we talk about how there's only so many resources to implement in clean energy policy. So let's be smart about it. And so Pythos Analytics is the type of platform that can make better decisions. So certainly salute them.
Yeah, so cool.
Yeah. Real quick, I want to do 2 things real quick. I want to give 2 shout outs. One is a friend of my wife and I, Maureen Sweet. She's in Austin, Texas. She's a consultant. She did a great job in using Facebook and social media last week to give a play-by-play of what's happening in her personal life with regards to the Texas crisis. And that really prompted me to have a conversation with Lucas about having a guest this week. And we were both, very uniform in that. And then secondly, one of my mentors in terms of understanding the oil and gas industry when I was doing economic development is a French gentleman named Xavier Tisson. He worked for FMC Technologies at the time. He's the gentleman French Texan, as I like to call him. I just saw this week that his father passed away in France, and just wanted to give a shout out to Xavier and my sympathies to the family. So,
bummer.
Yeah, really. I never met his father, but the photos look like Xavier is a chip off the old block. So, a lot of suffering this week in Texas, and we're going to do our part to help address that as best we can.
Yeah, if you have any more questions, let us know on the comments, or find us on Twitter, find us on LinkedIn. If you want to subscribe on our YouTube channel, that would be great. That helps us out. If you click the alarm bell, then you get notifications on your phone like I do when our new episodes are up, so you can be the first to hear to hear the news. We're also on your favorite podcast site. I think most people like Apple Podcasts. So you can find us on there. Just search for Pirates of Clean Tech and click follow or subscribe. And then you'll get notified when our episode and our podcast hits there.
Yep. And of course, as we always say, the views and opinions expressed by the Pirates of Clean Tech are those of ourselves individually, not any organizations we're necessarily affiliated with. We had a big milestone. We exceeded 50 subscribers on YouTube, which nobody watches us on YouTube, but yet we have like 57 subscribers now. So.
Lots of views too. So keep them coming. Hit the like button.
Lots of views. Our guests this year, our guests this season have just been really helping us kind of exceed our expectations. So thank you to our guests as always. And with that, I'm Eric Planey.
I'm Lucas Finko.
And we are the Pirates of Clean Tech.
Yarr.